Karnsteins Armlets got a pretty massive change this season, not overall with what they do, but more so with how they work. Just like always, melee kills still trigger health regen and offer a bit of instantaneous healing, but this season they were updated to directly give cure and restoration effects. So the healing over time and instant health granted on melee kills no longer is just something random that Karnstein provides. It used to give the buff Vampire's Caress, which was its own unique healing over time effect. It no longer does this, which comes with some pros and cons. For starters, the healing provided from Karnsteins no longer is going to be stacking with restoration. In previous seasons, you could get the healing from Karnsteins procced, and then also pair this with your healing from restoration, similar to how restoration in a healing rift works. You can no longer do that since Karnsteins just gives you restoration directly. But the major upside is that you can now build into extending that restoration provided, along with the added benefit of being able to get restoration ×2 off of any finisher final blow, and any melee or finisher final blow will also be granting cure ×3, which is a full refund on all your health and shields. So even though we do miss out on stacking the healing effects, realistically, if you were using Karnsteins before, you probably weren't even stacking those buffs. And now, anytime you're extremely low on health, a melee or finisher final blow can get you back to full shields. When it comes to warlocks and their healing capabilities, currently there are already two really easy ways to get restoration ×2. The first being a simple healing grenade build with Touch of Flame, and the second being Phoenix Dive whenever you have heat rises up. Both of these methods are great for ×2 restoration, and I would argue in a lot of endgame content areas, they are both better methods than relying on Karnsteins. Healing grenade builds are super easy to use, and they're great because they also heal your team, and Phoenix Dive is typically combined with Sunbracers, which is an extremely strong build. The only upside that I really see with Karnsteins is the full health on melee and finisher final blows, along with the major fact that you always have access to ×2 restoration. Healing grenades and Phoenix Dive are both going to have cooldowns. Either way, I don't see a world where Karnsteins are really going to be meta. However, I do think they are extremely useful when hitting loadout swaps into different builds. For example, in this gameplay, I started off by getting a single finisher final blow, and during the animation of the finisher, I swapped to a Starfire build. With Starfire, there would be no way of ever getting restoration ×2, but with Karnsteins, I was able to proc it, swap, and then use Ember of Empyrean to extend the duration infinitely. I had the buff up for like 3 to 5 minutes and was able to keep it going as long as there were more enemies to kill, and eventually when I ended up losing the buff, I swapped back to Karnsteins, did another finisher, and then returned to my Starfire loadout to continue in just a few seconds. I also ended up using the build in some Master Lost sectors, just to show, even when under power, you're still able to maintain Radiant and Restoration pretty easily, while also dealing with champions. I think for newer players who like a simple and effective build, especially if you don't have min-max stats or armor setups, Karnsteins is going to be great. Easy ×2 restoration and full healing whenever you need, along with 0 cooldowns that affect the healing you're getting. Even though I did say it isn't super meta, I did still want to give you guys a build to run if you wanted to. And as always, all my builds are going to be featured over at Mobalytics. So if you guys ever want to see a ton of extra build detail, browse other builds, search builds by classes, or just check out other creators, Mobalytics has you covered. They also have a really solid tier list for exotics, which I was able to help work on myself and takes the whole player base into account. It's a great resource for people to use. That's why I partnered up with them for the last 2 seasons. When it comes to the build, obviously the only main thing we need on is going to be Karnsteins Armlets. We're going to be specifically aiming for that finisher, so we get ×2 restoration, which is going to last for 8 seconds, which is more than enough time for us to pop into our inventory and then go and select another loadout and then do that swap as we're in the finisher animation. And then after that, we're obviously relying on Ember of Empyrean with whatever build we're using. So for that reason, having something like Sunshot or any other solar weapon on to get rapid final blows to extend those durations is really useful. Sally's Bane is also another great option if you want to keep that exotic slot clear. Within the solar subclass setup, a lot of this isn't really going to matter. You can swap this around with whatever you want. The only important ones are going to be some of our fragments. And the reason for that is because Karnsteins doesn't really synergize that much with solar. We're really just using it to proc restoration, proc resto ×2, proc those cure effects, and then extend that within the solar subclass. Karnsteins doesn't really fit into most of our main abilities and have any synergies like that. So either which way, for our abilities, I have Well of Radiance, I have Healing Rift, you could easily swap this around. I have Fusion Grenade because I think it's the best grenade when on solar, especially when running something like Touch of Flame, which we also have. And then the only other main ability that I do think is somewhat important is your melee. I think Celestial Fire, which we're only ever using to proc Radiant through Ember of Torches, is a better, more consistent melee to proc Radiant than something like Incinerator Snap. I think Incinerator Snap can whiff a lot more often when you're trying to hit an enemy that's just slightly out of range. Celestial Fire has better range, better tracking, things like that. So for that reason, I do think Celestial Fire is a better melee to have on. After that, the only other thing in the build is Ikdash, just for some movements. That's basically it. And then after that, our fragments have a much larger impact. Our first and most important fragment on the build is going to be Ember of Empyrean. With this, we're going to be doing a finisher final blow with Karnsteins to get restoration ×2. We'll use our melee ability to proc Radiant, which is a 25% buff. Plus it provides our weapons with anti-barrier rounds. And then as we're getting solar weapon final blows, this is going to infinitely extend Resto and Radiant, which is perfect. Next up is Ember of Singeing. This could easily be swapped out. This is just on my Starfire build, so I needed to have all the fragments and the aspects set in the same order so I could do swaps like I was in the video. With Ember of Singeing, this is still really nice, especially with a weapon that has Incandescent or even Sunshot, which has some intrinsic Scorch. We are constantly applying Scorch to enemies and getting a much faster regen rate for our class ability. Ember of Torches is then the second most crucial fragment to the build. This is actually how we're getting Radiant effects with our melee. Super simple, use your charged melee, you get Radiant, and then again, we're infinitely extending that. And then finally, we have Ember of Ashes. This increases the Scorch stacks we apply by 50%, which is a pretty massive bump. Even if you're not swapping to another random build where Ember of Ashes is useful, it's still great in this build because with Touch of Flame, a Fusion Grenade, and our Celestial Fire melee, we can throw the grenade, throw our melee, and that's enough to trigger an ignition on top of our Fusion Grenade exploding twice. That being said, if you don't really find a need for Ember of Ashes and you're swapping to a different build, you can easily sub this one out as well. The only two major ones that you want to keep are going to be Ember of Torches and Ember of Empyrean for obvious reasons. Last up for the build are all the mods that we're using. I really don't think these have a major impact on the build. Once again, we're just using finishers and base melees and then just getting weapon final blows. So it doesn't really have a really crazy build cycle. It's just super simple, super easy to use. So I'll go over the mods that I think are important that you should be running. First up is a Siphon mod, especially like Harmonic Siphon, because we're going to be using a solar subclass with a solar weapon and Ember of Empyrean to extend things. It makes sense to just generate a ton of orbs of power through our weapon final blows. On our gauntlets, melee kickstart is great, not because we're using our melee that often, but just so that we have that higher uptime, so we can use our melee if for whatever reason Radiant runs out, we don't have enough enemies to kill to keep extending it, and that way we can reproc it again whenever we need. You could also probably sub out heavy-handed for another melee kickstart, because most of your orbs are going to be coming from Harmonic Siphon anyway, since these got heavily nerfed. Stacks on Stacks is also really great so that we can pick up orbs of power we create through Harmonic Siphon, get more armor charge stacks by default, and have them ready to go to proc melee kickstart for a higher refund. After that, Proximity Ward is also great, especially if you're one shot. You can go up and finish an enemy, get a ton of free health while in the finisher animation, on top of all the DR that like Overshield and finishers provide natively. And then after that, when the finisher actually goes through, you're getting that cure ×3, which is a full health and full shield refund. So this is great for getting off a finisher in a sketchy situation to go from 0 HP basically all the way up to full. And then lastly, when it comes to the artifact mods this season, Kindling Trigger is solid, especially if you want to just shoot an enemy once, throw a fusion grenade with Ember of Ashes. I believe that is 45 Scorch stacks per shot we shoot to an enemy. Plus then you throw a grenade, so that's also going to allow you to trigger an ignition. Flint Striker is great as we're getting precision final blow or precision hits and final blows with solar weapons. That's another way that we can become Radiant, so if your melee is not up, you can use that instead. And then after that, Revitalizing Blast is great for some additional damage just to debuff enemies, apply that 15% weaken. And then Raise of Precision is also great because as we're getting those precision final blows while Radiant with a solar weapon, which we almost always should be, that's also triggering an ignition, which is going to be really great for getting a lot of kills in a single kill, if that makes sense. We trigger that ignition after one final blow. It kills a lot of things around it. And then that's giving us a ton of extension on our Radiant and Restoration timers. That is it for the video, guys. Let me know your thoughts on Karnsteins Armlets in the comments. I think the change is solid, but I definitely didn't want to paint them out to be the next meta solar warlock exotic or anything like that. I think they have their use and they can be great for the right people. As always, have a good one, guys. Peace.